as Carol Anderson's perfectly manicured hand clutches her designer pearl necklace. Her face drains of color while her knees buckle beneath her. Behind her, Jim stares at me with his mouth agape, the champagne flute slipping from his fingers and shattering against our marble floor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The entire room falls silent as I calmly continue. Yes, for $87 million, I've sold MediSync Solutions to Parker Innovations, the same company that rejected my husband's job application 5 years ago, telling him his ideas weren't innovative enough. I take a sip of champagne, maintaining eye contact with my stunned mother-in-law as the paramedics rush in. The irony isn't lost on me. The little hobby business she told me to abandon to focus on giving her grandchildren just made me one of the wealthiest women in Colorado, and her precious son will now be working for the man who once called him mediocre. The morning of the announcement, I dressed with careful precision. A charcoal Armani suit paired with the simple emerald earrings I'd purchased after my first profitable quarter, not the diamond set Jim had given me, to look appropriate at his corporate events. My hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, my makeup subtle but flawless. I looked exactly like what I was, a CEO finalizing the most significant deal of her career. Not the lucky girl playing entrepreneur that Carol Anderson had labeled me at every family gathering for the past 5 years. Are you sure you want to wear that tonight, honey? Jim appeared in our bedroom doorway, already dressed in his custom-tailored suit. Mom mentioned everyone's dressing up for the announcement. His eyes skimmed over my outfit with that familiar look, the one that said I wasn't quite meeting expectations. I smiled, adjusting my earrings in the mirror. I'm dressed exactly right for tonight, Jim. For what I had planned, my outfit was perfect, professional, powerful, and purchased with my own money. A detail that would become significant very soon. You know how Mom gets about these things, he sighed, checking his Rolex, the watch his parents had given him when he made junior partner at his father's law firm. She's just excited about my promotion. It's a big deal for the family. Family. The word hung in the air between us. In the Anderson world, family meant their dynasty, their legacy, their carefully curated image. The one I'd never quite fit into, despite 5 years of trying. I won't embarrass you, I said, keeping my voice neutral as I applied a final touch of lipstick. After all, tonight is about celebrating good news. Just not the news they were expecting. Jim's phone chimed with a text. Mom says they're running 15 minutes early. Dad's eager to break out the 82 Bordeaux he's been saving. He didn't look up from his screen as he spoke, already typing a response. Perfect. I checked my own phone, where a very different message waited. The final confirmation from my attorney that the paperwork for the sale had been officially filed. $87 million had been transferred into my accounts at 9 a.m. that morning. The press release would go live at exactly 8 p.m., right around the time Carol would normally be making her toast to Jim's inevitable success. I'll be down in 5 minutes, I told him, waiting until he left before opening my laptop one last time. The email from William Parker himself sat in my inbox. Lisa, congratulations again. The announcement is scheduled per your instructions. I must say, I'm intrigued by your timing. Looking forward to watching it unfold. Bill. I smiled, thinking about the journey that had led to this moment. 5 years ago, I was just a software developer with an idea for streamlining healthcare information systems. Jim had been supportive in that condescending way of his, "It's cute that you want to try something on your own, babe," while his mother had been openly dismissive. A startup? At your age? Shouldn't you be focusing on starting a family? Carol had asked during our first Christmas as a married couple, her smile sharp as a scalpel. The Anderson men need strong women behind them, not distracted ones. Behind them, never beside them, and certainly never ahead. What the Andersons never bothered to discover was that before meeting Jim at that charity gala, I'd already turned down 2 acquisition offers for my previous software patents. They never asked about my background beyond confirming I had a good family, their code for money and social connections. They certainly never Googled me, or they might have found the industry articles about the promising young developer who'd worked her way through MIT on scholarships. To them, I was just Jim's pretty wife with a cute little hobby, the perfect accessory for their son's rise through the ranks of Anderson, Mitchell, and Reed, the law firm where 3 generations of Anderson men had built their legacy. I closed my laptop and slipped it into my bag along with a folder containing a single document, the final page of the acquisition agreement with my signature still gleaming on the line. A small touch, but I wanted Carol to see the physical proof when the moment came. Downstairs, I could hear the caterers Jim's mother had insisted on hiring. Lisa's too busy with her little project to handle a dinner party. Setting up in our dining room. The house smelled of expensive flowers and the particular brand of pretension that Carol brought with her everywhere. My phone buzzed again. A text from Michelle, my chief operating officer and the only person besides my attorney. Who knew about today's announcement? Everything set. Watch just went live on the Business Wire. You sure about the timing? Absolutely, I texted back. See you tomorrow at the office. Drinks on me. I took a deep breath, tucked my phone away, and headed downstairs to greet my in-laws for what would be one of the most memorable dinner parties in Anderson family history. There she is! Harold Anderson's booming voice greeted me as I descended the stairs. Jim's father stood in our foyer, a tumbler of scotch already in hand. The hostess, herself! Carol turned from where she was instructing one of the caterers, her critical eye immediately assessing my appearance. I saw the flicker of disapproval, quickly masked with her social smile. Lisa, darling, that's a very professional look for tonight's celebration. Thank you, Carol. I accepted her air kiss, noting the extra diamonds she'd added to her usual jewelry ensemble. I thought it was appropriate for the occasion. Well, Jim's partnership announcement isn't exactly a board meeting. She laughed lightly, adjusting my collar as if I were a child. But you look lovely all the same. I gently stepped back from her touch. Actually, I have some news of my own to share tonight as well. Something in my tone must have registered because Carol's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. Oh? Something about your little software thing? MediSync solutions, yes. I smiled. But let's save the announcements for dinner, shall we? Jim appeared from the kitchen, champagne flutes in hand. Mom's right, babe. Tonight's really about the partnership. We can talk about your work stuff another time. 5 years of these subtle dismissals had taught me patience. Tonight, that patience would finally pay off. Of course, I conceded, accepting a glass from him. Your moment should come first. Carol beamed at her son, patting his arm possessively. The youngest partner in the firm's history. Your grandfather would have been so proud. What neither of them mentioned, what was never mentioned, was that the youngest partner was joining his father's firm, where his last name was on the door. Merit had very little to do with it. The next hour passed in a blur of superficial conversation. Carol dominated, as usual, discussing everything from the country club's new chef to the disappointment of her friend's daughter who had wasted her Harvard education by becoming a public defender. Harold talked stocks and golf, handicaps with Jim, while I played my usual role, the attentive wife who smiled at the right moments and asked the right questions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By the time we sat down for dinner, Carol was on her 3rd glass of champagne and growing increasingly animated about Jim's achievement. When Robert Mitchell calls personally to say your son is partnership material, she trailed off, looking misty-eyed. I always knew Jim was destined for greatness. Harold raised his glass. To the newest partner at Anderson, Mitchell and Reed. Everyone drank except me. I just smiled, checking my watch. 7:55 p.m. Actually, I said, setting down my untouched champagne, I'd like to make a toast of my own. Carol's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. Of course, dear, but perhaps after the meal? The caterers have prepared Jim's favorite. This won't take long, I assured her, standing and retrieving my bag from the side table. And I think you'll find it's quite relevant to tonight's celebration. Jim shot me a warning look, the one that said I was veering from the script, embarrassing him in front of his parents. I'd seen that look many times over the years, usually before he explained away my accomplishments or redirected conversations away from my company. Lisa, he started, but I was already removing the folder from my bag. 5 years ago, I began, my voice steady, I started MediSync Solutions with a vision to transform healthcare information systems. At the time, some people, I glanced briefly at Carol, suggested it was a hobby that would run its course. Carol laughed lightly. And we've all been very supportive of your little project, dear. Very modern of you. Thank you for that. Support, I continued, opening the folder. Today, I'm pleased to announce that MediSync Solutions has been acquired by Parker Innovations for $87 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Harold's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Carol's smile froze in place, uncomprehending. Jim spoke first. What are you talking about? Parker Innovations? Bill Parker's company? The same Bill Parker who told you your ideas weren't innovative enough when you interviewed there after law school, I confirmed. Yes, that Parker Innovations. 87 million? Harold finally managed, his financial mind grasping the significance first. That's impossible. Your little software company was just revolutionizing how healthcare providers exchange critical patient information, I finished for him. Just securing contracts with 17 major hospital networks across the country. Just being valued at nearly 9 figures by one of the most discerning tech investors in the industry. I removed the acquisition agreement from the folder and placed it on the table. The deal closed this morning. The press release goes live in approximately, I checked my watch, 2 minutes. Carol's face had gone from frozen smile to ashen shock. You sold your company? Without discussing it with the family? Without consulting Jim? My company, I emphasized gently. And yes, I made the decision that was right for my business and my team. But Jim was staring at the agreement, at the number of zeros clearly visible on the final page. How did this happen? You never said anything about an acquisition. You never asked, I replied simply. In 5 years, not once did any of... You ask about MediSync's growth, our contracts, our valuation. The only questions I ever got were when I was going to wrap it up and focus on starting a family. Carol was reaching for her water glass, her hand visibly trembling. This isn't how things are done in this family. Major decisions are discussed. We consult each other on important matters. Like Jim's partnership? I asked, raising an eyebrow. The one that was decided months ago in a private meeting between Harold and Robert Mitchell on the golf course? The one that was kept secret until tonight's announcement? Harold had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's different. The firm has traditions, protocols. So does business, I cut in. And in business, confidentiality during acquisition talks is standard practice. My phone buzzed. I glanced down to see Michelle's text. It's live. Your face is all over. TechCrunch. Congrats, boss. I smiled and turned the screen toward the table. And now it's official. Carol reached for the agreement with shaking hands, her eyes widening as she scanned the details. This says you're joining Parker's executive team. You'll be working for him? As Chief Innovation Officer, yes. And Jim? She asked, looking up with sudden alarm. What about Jim's career? His future at the firm? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The question that revealed what had always mattered most to Carol Anderson. Jim's career is his to manage, I said carefully. My professional decisions have always been separate from his, even if some people preferred to view my work as a hobby rather than a career. But this changes everything. Carol's voice rose slightly. The Anderson name, associated with Parker, after what he said about Jim. Jim was still staring at the agreement, his expression unreadable. Bill Parker is going to be your boss. Strategic partner, I corrected. And yes, the man who once rejected your job application will now be working closely with me to expand MediSync's technology across Parker's global healthcare division. Carol stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need a moment. She pressed a hand to her forehead, swaying slightly. This is not what tonight was supposed to be about. Carol, Harold cautioned, seeing the color drain from his wife's face. $87 million, she whispered, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. All this time, we thought, while you were actually... And then, it happened. Carol Anderson, the woman who prided herself on perfect composure in all situations, who had once maintained her social smile through an earthquake during a charity gala, swayed dramatically, her eyes rolling back, and collapsed, in a dead faint. Harold jumped up with surprising agility for a man his age. Jim, finally breaking from his stunned trance, lunged to catch his mother before she hit the floor. Call 911, Harold shouted, loosening Carol's pearl necklace as Jim lowered her to the ground. I calmly picked up my phone and dialed, watching the scene unfold with a strange detachment. As I gave our address to the emergency operator, I couldn't help but note the irony. Carol Anderson had just experienced a medical emergency in the home of the woman whose healthcare technology company she had dismissed for years. The paramedics arrived within minutes, professional and efficient. Carol was already regaining consciousness, mortified by her episode but insisting she was fine. Just a shock, she mumbled as they checked her vitals. I'm perfectly all right. One of the paramedics looked up at me. Are you Lisa Thompson from MediSync? I nodded, surprised. My hospital just started using your patient transfer protocol last month, he said with genuine enthusiasm. It's cut our critical care response time by almost 30%. Brilliant system. Carol's eyes widened from her position on the stretcher. Jim's jaw tightened as he helped his mother to a sitting position. Thank you, I replied simply. That's exactly what we designed it to do. After the paramedics determined Carol was stable, just a vasovagal episode brought on by shock, they left with recommendations for rest and fluids. The elegant dinner party Carol had planned was now in shambles, with the catered meal growing, cold on the dining table. Harold helped Carol to the sofa where she sat with uncharacteristic meekness, occasionally glancing at me with bewildered reassessment. Jim poured himself a stiff drink, downing it in one go before finally turning to face me. Were you ever going to tell me? He asked, his voice unnaturally controlled. Or was this public ambush the plan all along? I tried to tell you many times, Jim, I replied quietly. Last month when I mentioned the potential acquisition, you said, and I quote, "That's nice, babe, but can we talk about the country club membership? Dad's pulling strings." 2 weeks ago, when I was working late, on the final negotiations, you told me I should wrap up that project because your mother wanted us at the firm's summer gala. Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably. Jim, is that true? She never said it was an $87 million deal, Jim protested, gesturing wildly with his empty glass. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know. The figure, I acknowledged. That was confidential, but you could have asked what I was working on, what it meant to me, whether it was important. In 5 years, None of you ever really asked. Carol had recovered enough to find her voice again. We were trying to help you integrate into the family, Lisa. The Anderson women have always supported their husbands' careers. It's tradition. I never asked to be an Anderson woman, Carol. I married Jim, not a role in your family hierarchy. Harold, ever the pragmatist, seemed to be mentally recalculating everything he thought he knew about his daughter-in-law. 87 million, he murmured, almost to himself. Parker Innovations. He looked up suddenly. You'll be worth more than the entire Anderson family combined. The blunt financial assessment was so typical of Harold that I almost laughed. It's not about the money. It never was. It was about building something meaningful, something that helps people, something that's mine. But what about our plans? Jim demanded, pacing now. The lake house we talked about buying next year? The position on the hospital board Dad was arranging for us? For you, I corrected gently. Those were your plans, Jim. Your parents' plans for you. For us. And you've had this secret plan all along, he accused, anger beginning to replace shock. Working with Bill Parker of all people. You know how I feel about him. This isn't about your feelings about Bill Parker, I said firmly. This is about my company and the 500 people who work there. About technology that's saving lives in emergency rooms across the country. That paramedic recognized my name, Jim. Not because I'm your wife, but because my work made his job better. Carol had recovered enough to reach for her abandoned champagne glass, taking a long sip before speaking again. So what happens now? Will you be moving to San Francisco? Parker Innovations is headquartered there, isn't it? The question revealed her immediate concern, how this would affect her son's carefully plotted life path. Parker is opening a Denver office with MediSync as the cornerstone, I explained. I'll be splitting my time between here and San Francisco, but my primary residence will remain in Colorado. And Jim? Carol pressed, unable to help herself. What about Jim's position in all this? I turned to my husband, whose face still registered shock and betrayal in equal measure. That's up to Jim. My career decisions have always been separate from his. That hasn't changed. Jim drained his second scotch, slamming the glass down with more force than necessary. You're working with the man who humiliated me, who said my ideas weren't good enough. Bill Parker rejected your job application, I clarified. That's business, not personal. Just like this acquisition is business, not personal. Not personal? Jim laughed bitterly. You announced this during the dinner celebrating my partnership? In front of my parents? How is that not personal? I considered his question carefully before answering. For 5 years, every accomplishment I've had has been minimized, ignored, or treated as a distraction from what really matters. Your career, your family's expectations. Tonight, I finally had something too significant to be dismissed. Something that demanded acknowledgement. Carol made a small, wounded sound. We never dismissed you, Lisa. We simply wanted you to understand the Anderson family values, our traditions. Like the tradition of the Anderson Christmas card? I interrupted, surprising even myself with the example. The one where Carol dictated what we would wear, where we would stand, and then photoshopped my smile because it wasn't Anderson enough? Harold winced. Carol, you didn't. It was for the family image, Carol defended weakly. Lisa's smile was too assertive. The absurdity of the statement hung in the air. Finally, Harold broke the silence with an unexpected chuckle. That quickly grew into full-throated laughter. My God, he wheezed, wiping his eyes. All this time we've been treating you like a decorative addition to the family, and you've been building an 8-figure company under our noses. He raised his glass to me. Well played, Lisa. Absolutely well played. Carol looked at her husband, in shock. Harold, how can you... Oh, stop it, Carol. Harold cut her off with unusual firmness. The girl outmaneuvered all of us. Made us look like fools, truth be told. But damned if I can't appreciate a good strategic play when I see one. He turned to me with newfound respect. You'll have to tell me about this medical software of yours sometime. Properly, I mean. For the first time since I'd known him, Harold was seeing me as something other than his son's attractive, somewhat ornamental wife. I nodded, a small acknowledgement of this shift. I'd be happy to, Harold. Jim had moved to the window, staring out at the darkness, his back rigid with tension. So that's it? You dropped this bomb and we're all supposed to just adjust to your new reality? Yes, I said simply. Just like I've been adjusting to your family's vision of reality for 5 years. The difference is, I'm not asking you to pretend to be someone you're not. Carol had recovered enough of her composure to straighten her clothing and revert to what she knew best, social management. Well, this has certainly been unexpected, but I suppose congratulations are in order. The word seemed physically painful for her to say, though the timing could have been more considerate. Thank you, Carol, I accepted with deliberate graciousness. Your acknowledgement means a great deal. She flinched slightly, likely recognizing her own phrases repeated back to her. The same condescending formulation she'd used whenever I achieved something she deemed minor. My phone buzzed again with another message from Michelle. CNN Business picked up the story. You're trending on LinkedIn. The office is popping champagne. When are you coming in? Tomorrow morning, regular time, I texted back. Then, looking at the ruins of the dinner party around me, I added, things still unfolding here. Harold had moved to refill his drink, studying me with a calculating look that I recognized from Jim's more strategic moments. Parker will want to leverage the Anderson connection in the healthcare sector, he mused, already thinking of angles. Our firm has several major hospital groups as clients. That would be Bill's decision, I replied neutrally. And yours. My role is technology innovation, not business development. 87 million, Harold repeated, shaking his head with something like admiration. The firm's annual billings aren't even half that. Carol shot her husband a warning look, but the damage was done. The Anderson family myth, that the law firm represented the pinnacle of achievement, had just been casually undermined by Harold himself. Jim finally turned from the window. I need some air. He walked past us all and out the front door without another word, letting it slam behind him. Carol half rose to follow him, but Harold placed a restraining hand on her arm. Let him go, Carol. Boy's got some thinking to do. In the awkward silence that followed, I collected the acquisition document from the table and returned it to my bag. I think perhaps we should call it an evening. It's been eventful. Carol stood, smoothing her designer dress with trembling hands. Yes, well, I suppose Jim's partnership announcement can wait for another time. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on any of us. In the span of an hour, Jim's momentous achievement, the one Carol had been building up for weeks, had been reduced to an afterthought. Congratulations to Jim all the same, I said sincerely. He's worked hard for the partnership. Harold helped Carol gather her things, the evening clearly beyond salvation. We'll check on Jim, he assured me. Let him cool off a bit. As they prepared to leave, Carol paused at the door, turning to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, uncertainty mixed with a grudging reassessment. Lisa, she began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. Finally, I misjudged you. We all did. Coming from Carol Anderson, this was the equivalent of a full apology and surrender combined. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. After they left, I stood alone in the quiet of our home, surrounded by the debris of the dinner party and 5 years of misperceptions. My phone continued to buzz with notifications, but I set it aside. taking a moment to absorb what had just happened. I hadn't planned to cause such drama. The timing of the announcement had been a business decision, coordinated with Parker's PR team for maximum market impact. But I couldn't deny the satisfaction of finally being seen, truly seen, by the family that had been looking through me for years. Outside, I could hear Jim on his phone, his voice rising and falling as he paced the driveway, likely calling his closest friend to vent about his wife's betrayal, her humiliation of the family. It would take time for him to understand that this wasn't about him at all, that it never had been. I poured myself a fresh glass of champagne and walked to the window, watching as Harold's luxury sedan pulled away, Carol's silhouette rigid in the passenger seat. In the driveway, Jim continued his animated phone conversation, gesturing emphatically in the darkness. My phone lit up with a text from Bill Parker himself. Heard there was quite a scene at your announcement dinner. Offer still stands to join. The team meeting tomorrow. Your choice. I smiled, typing back, I'll be there. 9 a.m. sharp. Whatever happened with Jim and his family was secondary now. For the first time since our wedding, my path was clear and entirely my own. I had built something valuable, something important, and tomorrow I would begin the next chapter, whether the Andersons approved or not. I raised my glass in a private toast to myself and to the business I'd built while being underestimated by everyone around me. To MediSync Solutions, I murmured, and to finally being seen. I barely slept that night, watching as the digital clock on my nightstand ticked past 2 a.m., then 3 a.m. Jim never came to bed. I could hear him downstairs, pacing and making occasional phone calls in hushed, urgent tones. Around midnight, I'd heard Carol's voice in our foyer, apparently recovered enough from her fainting spell to return and console her son. Now the house was quiet except for the occasional clink of ice in a glass. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing, with notifications. TechCrunch, Forbes, Bloomberg, all running variations of the same headline about MediSync's acquisition. Congratulatory texts poured in from colleagues, former classmates, even competitors. A few industry acquaintances who had connections to Anderson, Mitchell, and Reed sent veiled questions about the interesting timing of the announcement. News traveled fast in Denver's business circles. At 5:30 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, a slate blue power suit I'd purchased after closing our first major hospital contract, subtle makeup, and my grandmother's vintage watch. Not the pearls Jim had given me on our 3rd anniversary with Carol's guidance on appropriate jewelry for an Anderson wife. Today wasn't about the Andersons. It was about Lisa Thompson, Chief Innovation Officer of Parker Healthcare Technologies. When I came downstairs, Jim was slouched on the living room sofa, still in his rumpled suit from dinner, an empty whiskey tumbler dangling from his fingers. He looked up as I entered, his eyes bloodshot and accusatory. Off to celebrate with Bill Parker? His voice was rough from what smelled like a night of drinking. Morning executive meeting, I corrected, setting my laptop bag on the counter. The integration teams are waiting for direction. 500 people, Jim muttered, more to himself than to me. You employ 500 people and I never even knew. I started the coffee machine, programmed specifically to be ready at 6 a.m. You never asked. You once referred to my little office as my lady boss clubhouse, if I recall correctly. That was a joke, he protested weakly. Was it? I measured out my usual breakfast portion of Greek yogurt, adding fresh berries and granola. When I mentioned hiring our 100th employee, you asked if I was still playing startup, and then immediately changed the subject to the Richardsons' yacht party. Jim ran his hands through his disheveled hair. I didn't realize it was serious. That's the problem, Jim. You never considered that my work might be just as serious as yours. I poured the coffee into my travel mug, adding a precise splash of almond milk. These morning routines were unchanged from yesterday, last week, last year, but everything else had shifted irrevocably. My mother came back last night, Jim said, watching me prepare for my day as if seeing this ritual for the first time. She wanted to make sure I was okay after what happened. I gathered. She's never fainted before. Not once in her entire life. Not even when Dad had that heart scare 2 years ago. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the familiar bitterness ground me. I imagine her worldview experienced quite a shock. The hierarchy she's built her identity around suddenly rearranged itself. This isn't funny, Lisa. Jim stood now, swaying slightly. You humiliated my entire family, in our home, on what was supposed to be my night. I announced a major business achievement. During a family dinner, I corrected. The fact that you and your parents experienced that as humiliation says more about your perspective than my actions. Jim's face flushed with anger. You did it on purpose. You knew exactly what you were doing, choosing tonight of all nights. The timing of the announcement was set weeks ago, coordinated with NASDAQ's closing bell and Parker's quarterly investor call. I explained with the same patient tone I'd used countless times when Jim dismissed my work. The fact that it coincided with your partnership dinner was actually inconvenient for me professionally. Inconvenient, he repeated incredulously. That's what you call destroying 5 generations of Anderson family standing in the legal community? Inconvenient? I set down my coffee mug, finally letting some of my frustration show. How exactly did my company's acquisition destroy your family's standing? Has your partnership offer been rescinded? Has your father been removed from the firm's letterhead? Or is the real issue that someone married to an Anderson dared to achieve something significant outside the family's carefully controlled narrative? You're working with Bill Parker, Jim exploded, his voice rising. The man humiliated me. He said my approach to legal innovation was derivative and unoriginal. And that comment made 5 years ago by a potential employer still bothers you enough that my professional opportunity is overshadowed by your wounded pride? Jim stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. It's Bill Parker, he repeated, as if the name alone explained everything. Yes, and he's now my strategic partner in building healthcare technology that's saving lives, I said evenly. Your personal feelings about him aren't relevant to that mission. Not relevant, Jim repeated hollowly. So that's where we stand. My feelings aren't relevant to your decisions. I sighed, feeling a wave of exhaustion that had nothing to do with my sleepless night. That's not what I said, Jim. But this particular decision, the sale of my company, was a business decision made for business reasons. It wasn't about you. Everything the Andersons do reflects on the family, Jim recited, sounding eerily like his mother. That's what being part of a legacy means. I didn't marry a legacy. I married you. I picked up my laptop bag and travel mug, checking my watch. We'll need to continue this discussion later. I have a meeting at 7 a.m. Of course you do, Jim said bitterly. Can't keep Bill Parker waiting. The meeting is with my leadership team, actually. People who've worked alongside me for years to build something meaningful. I paused at the door, looking back at my husband. This man I'd once thought saw me as an equal partner. When you're ready to talk about us, not about the Andersons, not about Bill Parker, but about you and me, I'll be here. He didn't respond, just turned away and reached for the whiskey decanter again. I closed the door quietly behind me, the morning air cool against my face as I walked to my car. The office was already buzzing when I arrived, despite the early hour. People were gathered in small clusters, talking excitedly, several wearing the company t-shirts we'd distributed at our last milestone celebration. As I swiped my keycard, the conversations paused, and then, to my complete surprise, the entire floor broke into applause. Michelle appeared at my side, grinning broadly. We were taking bets on whether you'd come in today or take a victory. Lap somewhere exotic. She handed me a fresh coffee. Figured you'd need reinforcements after last night's excitement. News travels fast, I observed dryly. Bill called me, she admitted. He was concerned about how the family dinner went. Mentioned something about a medical emergency. Carol Anderson had a dramatic fainting spell when she realized her son's decorative wife was worth more than the entire Anderson family fortune. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Michelle winced. That bad, huh? Let's just say I won't be receiving any Mother-in-Law of the Year awards. I glanced around at the celebrating team members. Everyone seems happy about the acquisition. Are you kidding? The stock options alone have several people checking real estate listings this morning. Michelle lowered her voice. Plus, Parker's reputation for innovation means we might actually get to implement some of the more ambitious projects we've had on hold. I nodded, feeling a familiar surge of pride in what we'd built together. That's exactly why Parker was the right partner. They understand our vision. And the $87 million didn't hurt, Michelle added with a wry smile. The valuation reflects the quality of our work, I agreed, then gestured toward the conference room where several people were already gathering. Let's get this integration started. The morning passed in a whirlwind of meetings, conference calls, and planning sessions. Bill Parker himself dialed in for a brief congratulatory address to the team, his distinctively confident voice filling our largest conference room. MediSync represents exactly the kind of innovation we want to nurture at Parker, he told the assembled staff. Lisa Thompson has built something extraordinary here, not just technology that works, but technology that matters. Together, we're going to transform healthcare information systems across the globe. I watched my team's faces as he spoke, seeing the mixture of pride and excitement in their expressions. These people had believed in my vision when it was just lines of code and ambitious ideas. They'd worked late nights and weekends, solved seemingly impossible problems, and celebrated each small victory along the way. They deserved this moment. When Bill announced the retention bonuses and expanded stock options for all employees, the room erupted in cheers. I caught Michelle's eye across the table and saw her mouth worth it with a grin. It wasn't until the lunch break that I finally had a moment to check my personal phone. 27 missed calls and 43 text messages glowed accusingly on the screen. Most were from Jim, a few from Harold, and several from unknown numbers that I suspected were journalists trying to get comments about the acquisition. I scrolled through Jim's texts, watching his mood evolve from angry, "You planned this to humiliate me," to self-pitying, "After everything I've done for you," to conciliatory, "Can we please just talk?" The last one, sent about an hour ago, simply read, "Mom's at the house. She wants to speak with you. Please call." Harold's messages were more measured. "Quite a coup you've pulled off. Jim's taking it hard. Carol insists on making amends. Call when you can." Making amends, as if I were the one who had spent 5 years diminishing someone else's achievements. I was about to put my phone away when it buzzed with an incoming call from Bill Parker's direct line. "Lisa," his voice was warm when I answered. "How's the team holding up on day one? Excited, focused, ready to move forward?" I moved to the window of my private office, looking out at the Denver skyline. "Thank you for your words this morning. They meant a lot to everyone." "I meant every word," Bill assured me. "Your patient information exchange protocol is years ahead of anything else on the market, but that's not why I'm calling." I tensed slightly. "Oh, I just got off the phone with Harold Anderson," Bill said, his tone carefully neutral. "Interesting. Man. Wanted to discuss potential synergies between his law firm's healthcare clients and our newly expanded portfolio." "Harold doesn't waste time," I remarked, unsurprised. "He's always looking for angles." He also mentioned that his son, your husband, might be interested in heading up our legal division's regulatory compliance team. Bill paused significantly. "A position I don't recall creating." I closed my eyes briefly. Bill, I'm sorry. That's completely inappropriate. I had no idea Harold would— I assumed as much, Bill cut in smoothly. I just wanted you to know it happened. I told Harold that Parker Innovations maintains strict hiring protocols for all positions, especially leadership roles, and that no exceptions would be made, regardless of family connections. Thank you, I said, relieved and embarrassed in equal measure. I appreciate your handling it, and I apologize for Harold's presumption. No apology necessary. Bill's tone lightened. Though I must say, it puts our previous encounter with James Anderson in a new light. 5 years ago, when he interviewed for our legal innovation team. Jim has always felt you were particularly harsh in your assessment, I acknowledged. Bill chuckled. I recall being impressed by his credentials but concerned about his perspective. He seemed to believe that his family name should carry significant weight in my decision-making process. That sounded exactly like Jim, who had grown up in a world where the Anderson name opened doors automatically. Well, I said diplomatically, yesterday was quite a shock for the entire Anderson family. They're adjusting to a new reality. Indeed they are. Bill sounded amused. I look forward to seeing you at the executive retreat next weekend. The integration team could use your insight on the healthcare privacy compliance roadmap. After we disconnected, I sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the implications of Harold's call to Bill. Already the Andersons were maneuvering, looking for ways to capitalize on my achievement, to fold it into their family narrative. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow the speed of their pivot from dismissal to exploitation still caught me off guard. My office door opened and Michelle poked her head in. The hospital network team is ready for you in conference room. B. They've got questions about the integration timeline. I'll be right there, I assured her, setting my phone aside. The Andersons would have to wait. I had a company to transition. By the time I pulled into our driveway that evening, it was past 8 o'clock. The house was ablaze with lights, and 3 cars were parked outside: Jim's Audi, Harold's Mercedes, and Carol's Lexus SUV. The entire Anderson family awaiting my return. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my strength for what promised to be an emotionally charged evening. Part of me wanted to turn around, check into a hotel, and deal with this another day. But postponing the inevitable wouldn't make it easier. As I approached the front door, I could hear voices inside. Carol's distinctive cadence rising above the others, then Jim's responding more deeply. I entered quietly, setting my keys on the side table in the foyer. The conversation in the living room stopped abruptly. 3 heads turned to face me. Lisa. Harold stood first, his tone carefully cordial. Thank you for joining us. I raised an eyebrow at the phrasing. I live here, Harold. Carol rose from the sofa, her usual impeccable appearance slightly diminished by the events of the previous night. Her makeup was flawless as always, but there was a new hesitancy in her bearing. Lisa, dear, she began, her voice pitched to the conciliatory tone she typically used when smoothing over social awkwardness at her charity events. We've been having a family discussion about recent developments. I gathered. I set my laptop, bagged down and remained standing, unwilling to be positioned as a supplicant in my own home. Though I'm curious why this family discussion is happening in my living room without my knowledge or consent. Jim winced. Lisa, please. Mom's trying to make things right. Is she? I looked directly at Carol. Or is she trying to find a way to incorporate my achievement into the Anderson family narrative so it feels less threatening to the established order? Carol's artificial smile faltered. That's not fair, Lisa. We're here to support you, to celebrate your success. My success. I let the words hang in the air. The same success you've been dismissing as a cute hobby for 5 years? The same work you suggested I should wrap up to focus on more important things, by which you meant producing grandchildren for you. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps we've all been guilty of underestimating the significance of your company. For that, we apologize." Jim looked at his father in surprise. Harold Anderson rarely apologized for anything. "The question now," Harold continued pragmatically, "is how we move forward as a family. Jim's partnership at the firm, your new role at Parker Innovations, these are significant developments for the Anderson family portfolio." "There it is," I said softly. "Less than 24 hours, and already my achievement has been absorbed into the Anderson family portfolio." "That's not what Dad meant," Jim protested. "It's exactly what he meant," I contradicted. "Harold sees my company's acquisition as a new asset for the Anderson family to leverage. Carol sees it as a status adjustment that needs to be managed within her social hierarchy. And you, Jim, what do you see it as?" Jim looked trapped. "I see it as my wife achieving something amazing that I failed to appreciate," he said finally. "And I'm trying to make that right." It was the first genuine thing any of them had said since I walked in. "Thank you for that," I acknowledged. "But making it right isn't about one conversation or one apology. It's about fundamentally changing how you see me, my work, and my place in this marriage." Carol shifted uncomfortably. "Lisa, dear, no one is questioning your place. You've been questioning my place since the day I married Jim," I interrupted, finally giving voice to 5 years of accumulated frustration. "My clothes weren't Anderson enough. My interests weren't Anderson enough. My ambitions weren't Anderson enough. You've been trying to mold me into your version of an Anderson wife from the beginning." "I was trying to help you fit in," Carol protested. "The Anderson name carries certain expectations. Expectations I never agreed to," I finished for her. "I married Jim, not a role in your family dynasty." Harold, ever the strategic thinker, tried another approach. "Lisa, what do you want from this situation? Surely we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." I looked at him, almost impressed by his persistent view of life as a negotiation with terms to be settled. "What I want, Harold, is acknowledgement, not just of my company's financial success, but of the fundamental disrespect I've experienced in this family for 5 years. I want recognition that my identity exists independently of the Anderson name." "Of course it does," Jim said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Does it?" I challenged. "This morning, your father called Bill Parker to suggest you for a leadership position at Parker Innovations. Without consulting me, without considering whether it would undermine my professional standing to have my husband installed above me through family connections. That doesn't sound like respect for my independent identity." Jim's head snapped toward his father. "You did what?" Harold had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I was merely exploring opportunities, James, looking out for your interests. By calling my wife's new boss behind her back?" Jim's voice rose incredulously. "Dad, that's completely inappropriate." "I was handling it," Harold defended. "Making introductions. That's how business works." "Not at Parker Innovations," I said firmly. "Bill values merit over connections. He told me about your call, by the way." He wasn't impressed. Carol gasped softly. "Harold, you promised you were just going to make a congratulatory call about Lisa's achievement." The brief flash of genuine emotion from Jim, his indignation on my behalf, gave me a glimmer of hope. Perhaps somewhere beneath the layers of Anderson expectations, the man I'd fallen in love with still existed. "Lisa," Jim turned to me, his expression troubled. "I had no idea Dad was going to do that. I would never ask you to use your position that way." "Wouldn't you?" I questioned gently. "Last night, after I announced the acquisition, one of your first reactions was anger that I'd be working with Bill Parker after what he did to you. Your immediate frame of reference was how my achievement affected your ego, not what it meant for me professionally." Jim flinched at the accuracy of my assessment. I was shocked. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking exactly as you've been trained to think, I corrected. Everything filtered through the lens of Anderson family prestige. It's how you've approached our entire marriage. Carol stood abruptly. I think perhaps emotions are running too high right now. We should continue this discussion when everyone is calmer. That's your solution to every uncomfortable conversation, Carol, I observed. Postpone it until the feelings can be buried and everyone can pretend harmony has been restored. But nothing gets resolved that way. What would resolve this for you, Lisa? Harold asked bluntly. What specific action are you looking for from us? It was such a lawyer's question, seeking definable terms, measurable outcomes, but the issue at hand wasn't so easily quantified. I don't have a checklist of demands, Harold. What I need is a fundamental shift in how this family perceives me and my work. And that kind of change doesn't happen in one conversation. Jim moved closer to me, his expression torn between his lifelong deference to his parents and his desire to support his wife. Lisa's right, he said finally. We've all been seeing her through the Anderson lens instead of appreciating who she actually is. I'm as guilty of that as anyone. Maybe more so. Carol looked stricken. James, no one is saying we haven't appreciated Lisa. But we haven't, Mom, Jim interrupted with surprising firmness. Not really. Dad's calling Bill Parker behind her. Back proves it. We're still trying to control the narrative instead of just being proud of what she's accomplished. For the first time since I'd known him, Jim was standing up to his parents on my behalf. It was a small step, but a significant one. Harold, sensing a shift in the family dynamics, adjusted his approach. Perhaps we should take some time to reflect on what Lisa has said. It's been a transformative 24 hours for everyone. Carol nodded quickly, relieved at the suggestion of a retreat. Absolutely. We should all take some time to process. Lisa, dear, you must be exhausted after your big day. We should let you rest. Their eagerness to end the confrontation was palpable, but I wasn't going to let them off so easily. Before you go, I want to be clear about something. My work at Parker Innovations is going to be demanding. I'll be traveling frequently, making decisions that affect thousands of people. That's my priority right now. If the Anderson family can't respect that, then we have a larger problem than can be solved in one evening. Of course we respect your work, Carol assured me hastily. We're immensely proud of what you've accomplished. As of yesterday, I pointed out, after 5 years of dismissing it. Harold, ever practical, began gathering his things. Lisa makes a fair point, Carol. Our track record of supporting her career has been inadequate. We should acknowledge that and do better. Moving forward, coming from Harold, this was a significant concession. Carol looked at her husband in surprise, then nodded reluctantly. Yes, well, we certainly want to be supportive. As they prepared to leave, Jim walked his parents to the door. I could hear their murmured conversation in the foyer. Carol's concerned questions, Harold's more pragmatic responses, Jim's assurances that he would handle things with me. When Jim returned to the living room, he looked emotionally drained. That was intense. It was necessary, I replied, finally taking a seat on the sofa. Your parents needed to hear some hard truths. Jim sat across from me, studying my face as if seeing me clearly for the first time. I've been a terrible husband, haven't I? The blunt question caught me off guard. Not terrible, I said after a moment. Just blind to certain things. We both were. No, Jim shook his head firmly. You saw me clearly. You supported my career, came to every firm event, listened to every story about my cases. But I never did the same for you. I just assumed your work was less important, less demanding, less real somehow. His self-awareness was surprising, and I had to admit somewhat encouraging. Why? I asked simply. Why did you make that assumption? Jim considered the question seriously. I think I've been living my whole life inside the Anderson bubble, where the family name and legacy are the most important things, where success is measured by very specific metrics: law firm partnership, country club membership, the right address, the right connections. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. I never questioned any of it until yesterday, when I saw what you'd built while I wasn't even paying attention. And how did that make you feel? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Beyond the initial shock and anger. Honestly? Jim met my eyes directly. Ashamed and a little lost. Like I've been chasing the wrong things while you were doing something that actually matters. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, possibly ever. For the first time since the acquisition announcement, I felt a flicker of hope for our marriage. Medisync matters, I acknowledged. Saving lives through better information systems matters. But your work matters too, Jim. The difference is that you've been doing it to fulfill Anderson expectations, not because it's your passion. Jim looked startled by my insight. How did you know that? Because I've watched you for 5 years, I said simply. You're most alive when you're working on your pro bono cases, helping actual people with actual problems. The corporate work that impresses your father, that just drains you. Jim was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this truth about himself. I don't know how to reconcile all this, he admitted finally. My parents, your new position, my partnership. It's all colliding in ways I never anticipated. We don't have to figure it all out tonight, I said, feeling the exhaustion of the past 24 hours catching up with me. But we do need to decide if we're moving forward together or separately. And that means you'll have to make some hard choices about who you want to be, an Anderson first, or your own person first. I want to be your husband first, Jim said, quietly. I just need to figure out what that actually means now. It wasn't a solution, but it was a starting point. As I headed upstairs to shower and change out of my work clothes, I felt a weight lifting. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time in our marriage, we were at least acknowledging the real issues. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. First day down. You crushed it, boss. Tomorrow we tackle the hospital integration protocol. I smiled, typing back. Wouldn't miss it. 7 a.m. sharp. Whatever happened with Jim and the Anderson family, my path forward was clear. I had built something valuable, something meaningful, and now I had the resources and platform to expand its impact. The personal complications would sort themselves out in time. As I changed into comfortable clothes, I caught sight of my reflection in the bedroom mirror. I looked different somehow, more confident, more defined. Less like someone trying to fit into someone else's idea of who she should be. For the first time in 5 years, I felt fully like myself. Lisa Thompson, healthcare technology innovator. The Andersons would either adapt to this reality, or they wouldn't. Either way, I was moving forward. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. Pale dawn light filtered through the curtains as I slipped quietly from bed, careful not to wake Jim. He had tossed and turned most of the night, finally falling into a restless sleep around 3 a.m. I stood for a moment, looking down at his troubled face. Even in sleep, he seemed conflicted, his brow furrowed with the weight of expectations and realizations. In the kitchen, I prepared my usual breakfast and checked my schedule for the day. The integration team had back-to-back meetings scheduled, and Bill Parker was flying in for an afternoon press conference at our Denver headquarters. A text from Michelle reminded me to prepare talking points for the healthcare industry journalists who would attend. As I was gathering my things to leave, Jim appeared in the doorway, looking haggard, but determined. "You're up early," I observed, pouring a second cup of coffee and sliding it across the counter to him. "Couldn't sleep." He accepted the coffee, with a grateful nod. I kept thinking about what you said last night, about me chasing the wrong things. I waited, giving him space to continue. I called the hospital pro bono program this morning, he said, watching my reaction carefully. Asked them if they still needed help with the patient advocacy initiative. The patient advocacy program was something Jim had mentioned almost a year ago, a project to provide legal support for low-income families navigating complex medical decisions. He'd been excited about it until Harold had pointed out that it wouldn't help his partnership track. They said yes? I asked, genuinely pleased. Jim nodded. They seemed surprised to hear from me. Said they'd given up on Anderson, Mitchell, and Reed after Dad made it clear the firm's pro bono hours were better spent on corporate image cases. But you're going to do it anyway? I'm going to try. Jim sipped his coffee, a small act of defiance against the Anderson legacy. It might complicate things at the firm, but I need to figure out what actually matters to me. It was a tiny step, but a meaningful one. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, Jim was making a choice based on his own values rather than Anderson expectations. I think that's great, I said sincerely. The program would be lucky to have you. Jim's phone buzzed with an incoming call, his father's name flashing on the screen. He stared at it for a moment, then deliberately pressed decline. Dad can wait, he said with a newfound firmness. I wanted to ask you something first. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this small rebellion. Would it be possible for me to visit MediSync sometime? To actually see what you've built? Jim looked almost shy asking this, aware of how revealing the question was. In 5 years, he had never once asked to tour my company. Of course, I replied, surprised and touched by the request. Though it might be better to wait a few days. With the acquisition news, things are pretty chaotic right now. Right, of course. Jim looked down at his coffee. I just realized, I've never even seen your office. Not really. I dropped you off once for that holiday party, but I didn't come in. Because you had that important client dinner with your father, I recalled. Jim winced, which turned out to be drinks at the club with Dad's golf buddies. Not exactly crucial legal business. The admission hung between us, a small acknowledgement of the imbalance that had defined our relationship for years. I'd like to show you MediSync, I said, checking my watch. Maybe next week once the initial integration dust settles? Jim nodded, looking relieved. I'd like that. As I drove to the office, I found myself cautiously hopeful. Jim's desire to see my workplace, his interest in the pro bono program, these were small signs that perhaps he was beginning to see beyond the Anderson bubble. Whether it would last remained to be seen, but it was more self-awareness than he'd shown in 5 years of marriage. The office was even more energized than the day before. The PR team had transformed our lobby with new signage reflecting the Parker Innovations partnership, and several news crews were setting up for the afternoon press conference. Michelle met me at the elevator, tablet in hand and excitement radiating from her usually composed demeanor. The hospital in Chicago just called, she announced before I'd even stepped into the hallway. They want to fast-track the implementation of our emergency room protocol. Apparently, Bill Parker personally reached out to their board chairman. Already leveraging his connections, I observed, impressed with Bill's immediate engagement. That's a promising start. And it gets better. Michelle swiped through her tablet as we walked toward my office. 3 of our competitors have reached out about potential partnerships now that we have Parker's backing. Everyone wants a piece of the integrated healthcare platform we've been talking about for years. I smiled, remembering the early days when we'd pitched that same platform to investors who thought our vision was too ambitious and ahead of the market. Now, with Parker Innovations behind us, those same skeptics were scrambling to get involved. Let's not rush into anything, I cautioned, setting my bag down in my office. We need to make sure the core MediSync integration goes smoothly before we start adding partners. Michelle nodded, making a note. Bill said the same thing when the Welltech CEO called him this morning. Great minds, apparently. Speaking of Bill, what time does his flight get in? Noon. The car service is picking him up, and he'll come straight here for a quick briefing before the press conference at 2. Michelle hesitated, then added, he also mentioned that he received another call from Harold Anderson this morning. I sighed, unsurprised but disappointed. What did Harold want this time? Bill didn't go into detail, but he seemed amused. Said something about persistent family dynamics, and that he was handling it appropriately. I made a mental note to address this with Jim later. Harold's continued interference was exactly the kind of boundary issue we needed to resolve if our marriage had any chance of evolving. Let's focus on the integration timeline, I suggested, steering us back to business matters. The sooner we get the technical teams aligned, the better. The morning passed in a blur of conference calls, technical discussions, and preparation for the press event. Around 11, my assistant alerted me to a delivery in the lobby, an elaborate flower arrangement that required 2 people to carry it to my office. The card read simply, "Congratulations on your visionary leadership. Your mother-in-law, Carol Anderson." Michelle whistled softly when she saw it. That's either a genuine olive branch or the most passive-aggressive gesture I've ever seen. With Carol, it's probably both, I replied, reading the card again. The formal wording, your mother-in-law rather than just Carol, suggested she was still establishing boundaries and hierarchy even in her attempt at reconciliation. Are you going to call her? Michelle asked. I considered the question. Not right now. I appreciate the gesture, but we have more important things to focus on today. By the time Bill Parker arrived, the office was buzzing with anticipation. At 55, Bill had the confident bearing of someone used to commanding attention without demanding it. His salt and pepper hair and casual but impeccable attire projected the perfect balance of authority and approachability that had become Parker Innovations' brand identity. Lisa, he greeted me warmly, clasping my hand in both of his. Congratulations again on building such an extraordinary team. Thank you for recognizing their value, I replied, genuinely appreciative of his focus on the collective achievement rather than just my individual role. As we walked toward the conference room for our pre-press briefing, Bill gestured toward the massive flower arrangement visible through my office door. From the Andersons? He guessed with a knowing smile. My mother-in-law, I confirmed, attempting to adjust to the new reality. Bill chuckled. Harold was equally adaptive in his call this morning. Suddenly, he's very interested in healthcare technology and how Anderson, Mitchell, and Reed might support our innovative vision. I shook my head, embarrassed but not surprised. I apologize for Harold's persistence. The Andersons aren't accustomed to operating outside their established networks of influence. No apology necessary, Bill assured me as we took our seats at the conference table. I've dealt with family dynamics in business for 30 years. The Andersons are actually relatively straightforward compared to some. We were joined by Michelle and the PR team who ran through the schedule for the press conference and the key messages we wanted to emphasize. Bill listened attentively, occasionally adding insights about how to position the acquisition within Parker's broader healthcare strategy. One last thing, Bill said as the briefing concluded. I've had several inquiries about your husband's role in all this. Given the Anderson name's prominence in Denver legal circles, it's natural that journalists would make the connection. I tensed slightly. What are they asking specifically? Mostly whether James was involved in negotiating the deal, whether there's any tie to Anderson, Mitchell, and Reed. Bill watched my reaction carefully. I've instructed our PR team to emphasize that this was a standard acquisition process led by you and your executive team, with no involvement from your husband or his firm. Thank you, I said, relieved at his clear boundaries. That's exactly right. However, Bill continued, It might be helpful if we had a consistent response ready in case you're asked directly about your husband. Something that acknowledges your personal connection without suggesting any professional entanglement. I considered this thoughtfully. I can simply state that while my husband is proud of MediSync's achievement, his legal practice is entirely separate from my work in my healthcare technology. Bill nodded approvingly. Perfect, direct, clear, and non-controversial. As we prepared to head to the press conference, my phone buzzed with a text from Jim. Just saw the news alert about your press conference with Parker. Good luck. I'm proud of you. The simple message caught me off guard with its sincerity. No Anderson posturing, no concern about his own image, just straightforward support. I quickly texted back a thank you, feeling a cautious optimism about the small shifts in our relationship. The press conference went exactly as planned. Bill and I presented a united vision for the future of healthcare information systems, emphasizing how the integration of Parker's global platform with MediSync's innovative protocols would transform patient care. The assembled journalists asked thoughtful questions about implementation timelines, regulatory challenges, and market expansion plans. It wasn't until the formal Q&A was wrapping up that a local business reporter raised his hand with a final question. Ms. Thompson, given your husband's position at Anderson, Mitchell & Reed, and their significant healthcare client base, will the law firm be involved in the integration process or future legal matters for the combined company? I could feel Bill tense slightly beside me, though his expression remained neutral. This was exactly the type of question we'd hoped to avoid, one that implied nepotism or conflicts of interest. Anderson, Mitchell & Reed is one of many respected law firms in the Denver area, I replied smoothly. Parker Innovations works with legal partners across all its divisions based on specific expertise and needs. My husband's career is separate from my work in healthcare technology, and both of us respect that professional boundary. The reporter looked like he wanted to follow up, but the moderator smoothly intervened, thanking everyone for coming and announcing that Bill and I would be available for brief one-on-one comments afterward. Nicely handled, Bill murmured as we stepped away from the podium. Clear but not defensive. I smiled appreciatively, though inwardly I was troubled by the question. It highlighted the complications that would inevitably arise from the intersection of my professional achievement with the Anderson family expectations. After the press conference concluded and the reporters had gotten their final quotes, Bill and I retreated to my office for a brief debrief before his flight back to San Francisco. Overall, I'd call that a success, Bill declared, settling into the chair across from my desk. The market is responding positively, and the healthcare industry publications are giving us the serious analysis we wanted. The team is energized, I agreed, though I'm concerned about managing expectations in the short term. Some of the hospital administrators are already calling about accelerated implementation timelines. Bill nodded thoughtfully. That's a good problem to have, but I take your point. We should be careful not to overpromise in the excitement of the moment. As we discussed next steps and immediate priorities, my office phone lit up with an incoming call from the lobby security. Disco. Ms. Thompson, there's a Mrs. Anderson here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment but insists it's important. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Carol had actually come to my office? Without calling first? I can handle this another time, I told the security desk. Please tell Mrs. Anderson I'm in meetings all afternoon. She says she'll wait, the security guard replied, sounding uncomfortable. She's, already taking a seat in the lobby. Bill raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by this development. Family dynamics continue to evolve, I see. I sighed, torn between irritation at Carol's presumption and curiosity about what could have prompted this unprecedented visit. I'm sorry about this, Bill. Would you mind if I dealt with it quickly? Otherwise, she'll likely still be sitting there when we finish our meeting. By all means, Bill said, rising from his chair. I should check in with my team in San Francisco anyway. Take whatever time you need." After Bill stepped out, I took a moment to collect myself before calling, "Down to the lobby. Please escort Mrs. Anderson up." A few minutes later, my assistant showed Carol into my office. My mother-in-law had clearly dressed for the occasion in what I recognized as her important charity board meeting outfit. A tasteful St. John knit suit in navy blue, pearls, and subtle makeup that nonetheless had required significant effort. "Carol," I greeted her, not rising from my desk. "This is unexpected." "Lisa, dear." Carol glanced around my office, taking in the expansive views of downtown Denver, the sleek modern furniture, and the impressive array of industry awards displayed. On a side shelf, her expression was difficult to read, a mixture of surprise, reassessment, and something that might have been genuine respect. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Actually, Bill Parker is here for our post-press conference briefing," I replied, letting her absorb the implication that I was in the middle of high-level business discussions that her unannounced visit had disrupted. "Oh, I had no idea." Carol had the grace to look momentarily flustered. "I saw the press conference on the business news channel. You were very composed." Coming from Carol, this was high praise. Composure under pressure was a quality she valued above almost all others. "Thank you," I said, neither warm nor cold. "Was there something specific you needed, Carol?" "As you can imagine, it's a rather busy day." Carol smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from her. "I wanted to speak with you personally, about last night and other things." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same one Bill had just vacated. "Please, sit." Carol perched on the edge of the chair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "First, I want to apologize for Harold's behavior. Calling Mr. Parker directly was completely inappropriate. He was trying to help Jim, but that's no excuse." "No, it isn't," I agreed. "And it potentially compromised my professional standing with my new strategic partner." "Yes, I can see that now." Carol clasped her hands in her lap, knuckles whitening slightly. "Harold and I had a long discussion about boundaries this morning. He won't be making any more calls to Parker Innovations." I nodded, acknowledging this small victory. "I appreciate that. Was there something else?" Carol took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "I also wanted to acknowledge that I haven't been supportive of your career. I made assumptions about your company that were clearly erroneous." Coming from Carol Anderson, this was practically self-flagellation. I softened slightly, recognizing the effort this admission required from a woman who prided herself on always being right. "Why?" I asked simply. "You never even asked about MediSync, not in any meaningful way. Why was it so easy to dismiss?" Carol looked surprised at the direct question, but after a moment's hesitation, she answered with unexpected honesty. "Because it didn't fit the pattern I understood. The Anderson wives have always focused on supporting their husbands' careers, managing the social obligations, raising children who would carry on the family traditions. I'm not an Anderson wife," I pointed out. "I'm Jim's wife and my own person." "Yes, well," Carol smoothed her already perfect hair. "That's becoming abundantly clear." She glanced at the industry awards again, lingering on the Healthcare Innovator of the Year plaque from the previous year. "You've built something remarkable here, Lisa. I can see that now." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her acknowledgement, belated though it was. "That means a lot." Carol hesitated, then reached into her handbag and withdrew a small velvet box. "I also wanted to give you this. It belonged to Harold's grandmother, the first woman in the family to serve on a corporate board back in the 1940s. She was quite progressive for her time." She placed the box on my desk and opened it to reveal an elegant Art Deco brooch, emerald and diamonds set in platinum. "It's traditionally given to the Anderson woman who most embodies independence and achievement," Carol continued. Harold's mother gave it to me when I reorganized the family foundation and doubled its endowment. I'd like you to have it now." I stared at the brooch, then at Carol, astonished by the gesture. This wasn't just any family jewelry. It was a specific acknowledgement of my place in the Anderson hierarchy, but not in the way Carol had previously tried to define it. This was recognition of achievement on my own terms. "Carol, I don't know what to say," I admitted, genuinely moved. "You don't need to say anything." Carol's smile was more genuine than I'd ever seen it. "Just know that while I may be slow to adapt, I do recognize excellence when I see it. Eventually." It was as close to a real apology as Carol Anderson was capable of offering, and I accepted it in the spirit intended. "Thank you," I said, carefully closing the velvet box. "I'll treasure it." Carol's posture relaxed slightly, mission accomplished. "Now about the hospital board position Harold mentioned." I held up a hand, stopping her before she could revert to her usual managing mode. "Carol, I appreciate the gesture with the brooch, truly, but my professional decisions will continue to be my own. If the hospital board is something I decide to pursue in the future, it will be because it aligns with my goals for MediSync and healthcare innovation, not because it's an expected Anderson family station." Carol looked momentarily taken aback, but then nodded slowly. "Of course, I understand." She didn't, not fully, but she was trying, and that was more than I would have expected 2 days ago. As Carol prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "One more thing, Lisa, about Jim." I tensed slightly. "Yes?" "He called us this morning to say he's taking on that hospital patient advocacy program, the pro bono work Harold advised against." Carol's expression was complex, concern mixed with a hint of pride. "He seems quite determined." "It's a good program," I said neutrally. "The work is meaningful." Carol studied me for a moment. "You encouraged this?" "I encouraged Jim to figure out what matters to him," I clarified. "Beyond the Anderson expectations." To my surprise, Carol nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. Harold and I may have been somewhat rigid in our vision for Jim's path." It was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever heard from Carol regarding her parenting approach. "Jim has always wanted to make a difference," I said carefully. "Sometimes the Anderson focus on prestige and connections has overshadowed that." "Yes, well," Carol straightened her jacket in a gesture of composure. "We all have some adjusting to do, it seems." After Carol left, I sat quietly for a moment, processing the unexpected visit and the even more unexpected gift. The brooch represented a significant shift in how Carol viewed me. No longer just Jim's wife who needed to be molded into the Anderson image, but a person of achievement worthy of recognition in her own right. It was a small step, but meaningful. And like Jim's interest in the pro bono program, it suggested that perhaps the earthquake of the acquisition announcement had shaken loose some of the rigid patterns that had defined our family dynamics for years. My contemplation was interrupted by a light knock at the door as Bill Parker returned. "Family summit concluded?" he asked with a knowing smile. "For now," I confirmed, "though I suspect it's just the beginning of a longer process." Bill nodded understandingly. Family businesses, even tangentially connected ones, always come with their own unique complexities. The key is maintaining clear boundaries between personal relationships and professional decisions. "Exactly what I'm trying to establish," I agreed. "Well, from what I observed during your press conference performance, you're more than capable of navigating those waters skillfully." Bill glanced at his watch. "I should head to the airport for my flight back. The integration team is set for our video conference tomorrow morning?" 9 a.m. sharp, I confirmed. "We'll have the preliminary technical assessment ready for review." After Bill departed, Michelle appeared in my doorway, curiosity evident in her expression. So, your mother-in-law made a personal appearance. How did that go? Surprisingly well, I admitted, showing her the velvet box with the brooch. She brought a peace offering, an Anderson family heirloom that represents female achievement. Michelle whistled softly as she examined the exquisite piece. That's quite a gesture from the woman who fainted at the news of your success. Carol Anderson is nothing if not adaptive when it serves the family image, I observed, though my tone was more amused than bitter. At least she's making the effort. And your husband? Michelle asked carefully. Any progress there? I thought about Jim's text before the press conference, his interest in seeing MediSync, his decision to pursue the pro bono work against his father's advice. Baby steps, I replied, but meaningful ones. As I drove home that evening, I felt a curious mix of emotions. Professional satisfaction at the successful launch of our partnership with Parker Innovations. Cautious optimism about the small but significant shifts in the Anderson family dynamics. And something else, a sense of my own power, not just as a business leader but as a catalyst for change in my personal relationships. The house was quiet when I arrived, but there were signs of Jim's presence, his briefcase in the foyer, his laptop open on the kitchen counter. A note on the refrigerator caught my eye. At the hospital for pro bono orientation meeting. Should be home by 8. Thought we could talk. The simple communication, letting me know where he was, what he was doing, expressing a desire to connect, felt like a tiny revolution in our marriage patterns. I changed into comfortable clothes and poured myself a glass of wine, then settled at the kitchen island with my tablet to review the next day's integration schedules. The house felt different somehow, less like a showcase for Anderson family, success and more like a home where two equals might build a life together. Whether that potential could be realized remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, it felt possible. And that, perhaps, was the most significant outcome of my company's acquisition. Not just the financial and professional rewards, but the catalyst it had provided for re-examining the foundations of my most important relationship. When Jim's key turned in the lock an hour later, I found myself genuinely curious about his day, his experiences at the hospital, his thoughts on taking this small step toward defining his own path. For the first time in a long time, our conversation might be about real growth and change, not just the surface-level exchanges that had characterized too much of our marriage. As he entered the kitchen, I noticed something different in his bearing, a lightness I hadn't seen in years, as if setting down the weight of Anderson expectations, even temporarily, had allowed him to stand taller. "Hi," he said, sounding almost shy. "How was the press conference?" "It went well," I replied, sliding a glass of wine toward him. "How was the hospital?" Jim's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Incredible. The work they're doing with the patient advocacy program, Lisa, it's exactly the kind of law I always wanted to practice. Using legal expertise to actually help vulnerable people navigate the system." His excitement was contagious, reminding me of the passionate law student I'd first met, before the Anderson expectations had narrowed his vision to partnership tracks and country club connections. "Tell me about it," I said, genuinely interested. And for the first time in what felt like years, we began a real conversation about things that actually mattered to both of us. 2 weeks after the acquisition announcement, the rhythms of my professional life had taken on an exhilarating new tempo. Each day brought fresh challenges as our team worked to integrate MediSync's protocols with Parker's global infrastructure. The Denver office had become a hub of innovation, with technical experts flying in from San Francisco, Boston, and international offices to collaborate on what Bill was now calling the future of healthcare information systems. My personal life, meanwhile, existed in a curious state of transition. Jim and I had established a tentative new pattern, more honest communication, more genuine interest in each other's work, more conversations about what we actually wanted rather than what was expected of us. He had thrown himself into the patient advocacy program at the hospital, coming home with stories about helping families navigate complex medical decisions and the legal hurdles of healthcare access. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when Jim would slip into old Anderson patterns, particularly when his father called. But he was making a conscious effort to establish boundaries, even declining 2 country club events that Harold had insisted were essential networking opportunities. On this particular Friday morning, I was preparing for a video conference with European hospital administrators when Michelle knocked on my office door, an unusual hesitancy in her typically confident demeanor. "We just received an interesting invitation," she said, handing me an embossed envelope, hand-delivered by messenger. I recognized the elegant stationery immediately, the Anderson Family Foundation letterhead, with its distinctive crest. Inside was a formal invitation to the Foundation's annual gala, traditionally one of the most prestigious charity events in Denver. What was unusual was that the invitation was addressed to Lisa Thompson, CEO, MediSync Solutions, a division of Parker Innovations. Not Mr. and Mrs. James Anderson, as all previous invitations had been formulated. "There's a note," Michelle added, clearly curious about the contents. A small card in Carol's unmistakable handwriting accompanied the invitation. "Lisa, the Foundation Board would be honored if you would consider being this year's keynote speaker, addressing healthcare innovation and access. Your perspective would be invaluable. Carol." I stared at the note, trying to process this dramatic shift. The Anderson Family Foundation Gala had always been Carol's crowning social achievement, the event where she showcased the family's prominence and philanthropy. The keynote speaker was traditionally a nationally recognized figure whose selection reflected the foundation's priorities and the family's connections. For Carol to offer me this platform was unprecedented. "Are you going to do it?" Michelle asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "I'm not sure," I admitted, scanning the invitation details again. The gala was scheduled for 3 weeks away, enough time to prepare appropriate remarks, but also deep in the critical phase of our integration process with Parker. "Bill would probably love the PR," Michelle observed. "Healthcare access is one of his pet causes, and having you speak at a major foundation event would reinforce the public interest aspects of the acquisition. It's not the professional implications I'm concerned about," I said thoughtfully. "It's what this means for my relationship with the Andersons. Is this Carol genuinely recognizing my expertise, or is it an attempt to absorb my achievement back into the Anderson family narrative?" Michelle considered this. "Maybe it's both. From what you've told me about your mother-in-law, she's probably incapable of separating family image from genuine respect." "That's remarkably insightful," I acknowledged with a small smile. "Carol does tend to blend those considerations." My phone buzzed with a text from Jim. "Mom just told me about the keynote invitation. Your call entirely. No pressure either way. But for what it's worth, it was her idea, not Dad's." That detail was interesting. If Carol had proposed this without Harold's strategic input, it suggested a more genuine motivation. "I need to think about it," I told Michelle, setting the invitation aside. "Let's focus on the European hospital network first." The video conference was productive, with the European medical directors expressing enthusiasm for implementing MediSync's emergency response protocols in their facilities. By the time we wrapped up, it was nearly 7 in the evening in Paris and Brussels, but only 11 in the morning in Denver. "The Madrid team wants to schedule a follow-up next week," Michelle noted as we left the conference room. "They're particularly interested in the language adaptation features for cross-border patient transfers. Let's have the localization team join that call," I suggested. "And speaking of international considerations, do we have the London regulatory assessment yet?" Michelle was about to respond when my assistant interrupted. "Ms. Thompson, Mr. Parker is on line 1. He says it's important, but not urgent." I took the call in my office, curious about Bill's midday contact when we didn't have a scheduled check-in. "Lisa?" Bill's voice had its usual confident warmth. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Anything critical. Just finished with the European networks," I assured him. "What can I do for you?" "Two things, actually. First, the integration metrics from the Seattle hospital system are exceeding projections. Their emergency response times have improved by 34% since implementing the combined protocol." "That's excellent news," I said, genuinely pleased. The Seattle implementation had been our test case for the integrated approach, and its success validated our technical strategy. "Second," Bill continued, a hint of amusement entering his tone, "I received a rather formal invitation to the Anderson Family Foundation Gala, with a personal note from your mother-in-law expressing hope that I might attend to support Lisa's keynote address." I sighed. "She's getting ahead of herself. I haven't actually accepted the invitation to speak yet." "Ah," Bill chuckled. "Classic family dynamics. For what it's worth, if you do decide to accept, I'd be happy to attend. Could be a good opportunity to highlight the human impact of our technologies for a philanthropic audience." "That's exactly what I'm weighing," I admitted. "Professionally, it makes sense. Personally, it's more complicated." "Family usually is," Bill observed sagely. "Let me know what you decide. No pressure either way." It was exactly what Jim had said. No pressure either way. The parallelism wasn't lost on me, nor was the stark contrast to how the Andersons had always operated, with layers of expectation and obligation built into every interaction. After ending the call with Bill, I sat quietly for a moment, considering the invitation from multiple angles. Accepting would mean stepping onto Carol's carefully curated stage, but on my own terms, speaking about my own expertise. It would be a public acknowledgement of my professional standing, not as an Anderson wife, but as a healthcare innovator. My contemplation was interrupted by another text from Jim. Having lunch with hospital program director, she mentioned their expanding patient advocacy to include technology access issues. "Thought of you immediately. Maybe a potential collaboration?" I smiled at the message. 2 weeks ago, Jim would never have considered connecting my work with his new project. The suggestion indicated a genuine shift in how he viewed both our professional spheres. By the end of the day, I'd made my decision about the gala invitation. I called Carol directly, rather than sending a formal response. A small but deliberate choice to handle this on a personal rather than institutional level. "Lisa," Carol answered on the second ring, her voice carefully modulated to sound pleased, but not overeager. "How are you, dear?" "I'm well, thank you," I replied. "I'm calling about the Foundation Gala invitation." "Oh, yes," Carol said, as if it were a minor matter rather than something she was anxiously awaiting an answer about. "Have you had a chance to consider it?" "I have. I'd be honored to deliver the keynote address," I told her. "And I appreciate you thinking of me for this role." The brief pause before Carol responded suggested she might be collecting herself. "Wonderful. The board will be delighted. Your insights on healthcare innovation will bring a fresh perspective to the Foundation's mission." "I've also spoken with Bill Parker," I added. "He's received your invitation and plans to attend." "Mr. Parker is coming?" Carol couldn't quite hide her excitement at the prospect of having such a prominent business figure at her event. "How lovely. We'll make appropriate arrangements, of course." "One thing, Carol," I said, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "I'd like to focus my remarks on healthcare access innovation, specifically how technology can bridge gaps for underserved populations." "Of course, dear. Whatever subject you feel is appropriate." Carol's ready agreement was another sign of the shifting power dynamics between us. Pre-acquisition, she would have had definite opinions about suitable topics for the Anderson Foundation stage. "Thank you. I'll send over my preliminary remarks next week for the program materials." After we disconnected, I texted Jim to let him know I'd accepted the invitation. His response came quickly. Great! Mom's thrilled! Dinner tonight. To celebrate? That new place on Pearl Street you've been wanting to try? I smiled at his suggestion. The restaurant was one I'd mentioned months ago, but Jim had dismissed it as too trendy at the time, code for not Anderson approved enough. His suggestion now was another small indication of change. When I arrived home that evening to change, before dinner, I found a small package waiting on the kitchen counter with a note from Jim. Thought you might want to wear this for your keynote. It belongs with you now. Inside was the emerald and diamond Art Deco brooch Carol had given me in my office, now nestled in a new case alongside a matching pair of earrings I recognized from Anderson family photos. They had belonged to Harold's grandmother, the original recipient of the brooch, and I had seen Carol wear them at particularly significant family occasions. Jim arrived home as I was examining the jewelry, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Mom brought those over this afternoon, he explained. Said they should be with the brooch, with you. I think it's her way of saying she sees you now. Really sees you. The gesture was meaningful, particularly coming from Carol, for whom family heirlooms represented continuity and belonging. Thank you, I said simply, closing the case carefully. Both to you and to Carol. Jim moved closer, reaching for my hand. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past couple of weeks. About us, about what I want, about what's actually important. I squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him to continue. I realized I've spent my entire life trying to be the perfect Anderson, he said quietly. Following Dad's path, meeting Mom's expectations, checking all the boxes they defined as success. But I've never asked myself what success means to me. And now you are, I observed. Jim nodded. The patient advocacy work, it's the first thing I've done in years that feels completely right. Not because it advances my career or impresses anyone, but because it matters. It helps real people with real problems. I'm glad you've found that, I said sincerely. Everyone deserves work that feels meaningful. That's just it. Jim's eyes were alight with a new clarity. You've had that all along with Medisync. You built something that matters, something that helps people, while I was chasing meaningless status markers. It was the most insightful self-reflection I'd ever heard from my husband. It's not too late to change direction, I reminded him gently. That's what I wanted to talk about over dinner, Jim said, looking both nervous and determined. I've been offered a position directing the hospital's expanded patient advocacy program, full-time. It would mean leaving the firm. I stared at him, genuinely surprised. Leaving Anderson, Mitchell, and Reed? What does your father say about that? Jim's laugh had a newly liberated quality. He's not thrilled, as you can imagine. Says I'm abandoning the family legacy and throwing away years of groundwork. But for the first time in my life, Dad's disapproval isn't dictating my decisions. And that feels terrifying, Jim admitted with a rueful smile. And absolutely right. At the restaurant that evening, Jim shared more details about the hospital position, the expanded scope of work, the opportunity to build a team focused on healthcare advocacy, the potential to create meaningful change in how vulnerable patients navigated the medical system. The program director specifically mentioned wanting to establish protocols for technology access, Jim explained between bites of his entree. When I mentioned your work at Medisync, she was immediately interested in potential collaboration. That could be interesting, I acknowledged, genuinely intrigued by the possibility. Medisync's patient information protocols could absolutely be adapted for advocacy purposes. It wouldn't have to be a formal Parker partnership, Jim clarified quickly. Just an advisory conversation to start. But I thought it might be a way to connect our professional worlds that actually makes sense rather than the forced networking. My parents always pushed. The suggestion was thoughtful and respectful, recognizing the potential alignment of our work without presuming upon my position or connections. "I'd be happy to meet with your team," I said sincerely. "Healthcare. Access is exactly what I want to focus on for the Foundation Gala keynote, so the timing is good." Jim looked pleased, then suddenly hesitant. "About the gala. There's something you should know. Mom has invited some of her oldest friends, the core Anderson social circle. People who have known me since childhood, who have certain expectations." "You're worried about how they'll react to your career change," I guessed. Jim nodded. "And how they'll treat you. These are people who have always defined success very narrowly. Family name, firm partnership, the right connections. Your achievement doesn't fit their model, and neither does my new direction." "Are you concerned about facing them?" I asked gently. "Not for myself," Jim replied, surprising me. "For the first time, I really don't care what they think of my choices. But I don't want them to say anything dismissive to you, or to try to minimize what you've built." His protective instinct was touching, especially since it came from a place of genuine respect rather than paternalism. "I can handle Carol's friends," I assured him with a smile. "I've had plenty of practice navigating Anderson's social politics." "Yes, but this time it's different," Jim insisted. "Before, they saw you as my wife, an extension of me. Now you'll be the keynote speaker, the successful CEO. Some of them won't know how to process that shift." "Then this will be an educational experience for them," I said lightly, though I appreciated his concern. "Expanding perspectives is good for everyone, even Anderson family friends." Jim smiled, shaking his head slightly. "How did I not see how extraordinary you are for all these years?" "You saw what you expected to see," I replied without rancor. "We all do, until something forces us to look more closely." Over dessert, our conversation shifted to practical considerations about Jim's career transition, the timing of his departure from the firm, the financial implications, the logistics of establishing the expanded advocacy program. It was the kind of equal partnership discussion we should have been having throughout our marriage, but had rarely achieved. "I'll need to give the firm at least a month's notice," Jim mused. "Dad will insist on a proper transition for my clients, especially the larger ones." "That's reasonable," I agreed. "And it gives you time to develop a more detailed framework for the advocacy program before you start full-time." Jim nodded, then hesitated. "There's also the matter of my partnership compensation. Leaving means walking away from a significant income increase." "Are you concerned about our financial situation?" I asked directly. Jim laughed softly. "After your $87 million acquisition? No, but it does mean a shift in our financial dynamics. I'll be earning maybe a third of my current salary at the hospital program." "Does that bother you?" I was genuinely curious about his feelings on this aspect of our changing relationship. Jim considered the question thoughtfully. "A month ago, it would have. My Anderson identity was so tied to being the primary provider, the successful attorney, the one whose career determined our lifestyle." He met my eyes directly. "But now, honestly, it feels like freedom. Like I can pursue work that matters without worrying about maintaining a certain income level or status position." It was perhaps the most significant shift in Jim's perspective. This willingness to step away from the traditional role he'd been groomed for and embrace a different kind of success metric. "I'm proud of you," I told him sincerely. "Making this kind of change takes courage." Jim reached across the table for my hand. "I had a good example to follow. You've always made choices based on what matters to you, not what others expected." As we drove home after dinner, I reflected on the remarkable evolution of our relationship over the past 2 weeks. The acquisition announcement had functioned as a kind of earthquake, shaking loose the rigid patterns and expectations that had defined our marriage for years. From the rubble, Something new and potentially stronger was emerging. A partnership based on mutual respect and shared values rather than prescribed roles. Of course, challenges remained. Harold was unlikely to accept Jim's career change gracefully, and the upcoming Foundation Gala would test the new dynamics with the broader Anderson social circle. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about our path forward together. The following Monday brought a surprising development. I arrived at the office to find Michelle waiting with an unusual expression, part amusement, part concern. "Harold Anderson is in the lobby," she informed me. "He's asking to see you. No appointment." "First Carol, now Harold," I observed wryly. The Andersons seemed to be developing a habit of unannounced visits. "Should I send him up?" Michelle asked. "Or would you prefer to be suddenly very busy with urgent integration meetings?" I considered the options. Avoiding Harold would only postpone whatever conversation he was determined to have. "Send him up," I decided. "But stay close. If he's here to pressure me about Jim's decision to leave the firm, I may need reinforcements." Harold Anderson cut, an imposing figure as he entered my office a few minutes later. At 68, he maintained the physique and bearing of a man a decade younger, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom suit impeccable. Unlike Carol's hesitant approach during her visit, Harold strode in with his characteristic confidence, taking in my office with an assessing gaze. "Lisa," he greeted me, his tone professionally cordial. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I apologize for the irregular approach." "Not at all, Harold," I replied, gesturing to a chair. "What brings you to MediSync today?" Harold settled into the chair, maintaining perfect posture. "I wanted to speak with you directly about James's career considerations." So it was about Jim's decision, as I'd suspected. "I assume you're referring to the hospital advocacy position?" "Indeed." Harold's expression was carefully neutral. "Has he discussed this with you in detail?" "Of course," I confirmed. "It's an exciting opportunity for him to build something meaningful in healthcare advocacy." Harold studied me for a moment, seemingly assessing my level of involvement in Jim's decision. "Lisa, I've known my son his entire life. This sudden interest in abandoning his partnership track for nonprofit work, it's completely out of character. I can't help but wonder about external influences." The implication was clear enough. Harold thought I was behind Jim's career change, perhaps as revenge for years of Anderson dismissiveness, or as an attempt to separate Jim from his family's influence. "Jim is making his own decisions, Harold," I said evenly. "Based on what matters to him and where he feels he can make a meaningful contribution." "After 5 years of dedicated work toward partnership," Harold pointed out, "the timing seems remarkably coincidental with your company's acquisition and new prominence." I leaned forward slightly. "Harold, have you considered that perhaps Jim has been unhappy in corporate law for some time, but felt unable to explore alternatives because of family expectations?" Harold's brow furrowed. "James has never expressed dissatisfaction with his career path. Not to you, perhaps," I suggested gently. "But the Jim I've seen these past 2 weeks, engaged in patient advocacy work, excited about building a program that directly helps vulnerable people, that's the most fulfilled I've seen him in years." And this fulfillment conveniently coincides with his wife no longer needing his financial support, Harold observed shrewdly. "Now that you've achieved your considerable success, James is free to indulge in charitable interests." There was some truth to this observation, though Harold's framing was unnecessarily cynical. Jim's financial freedom was indeed a factor, in his willingness to consider a lower-paying but more meaningful role. "Financial security creates options," I acknowledged. "But Jim's motivation goes beyond that. He genuinely wants work that aligns with his values." Harold was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than confrontational. "You know, Lisa, when James first brought you home, I told Carol you had a strength she wasn't recognizing. a quiet determination I recognized from my own mother, the woman whose brooch Carol recently gave you. The reference to the family heirloom surprised me. I didn't realize you were aware of that. Of course, those pieces have significant meaning in our family history. Harold's tone softened slightly. My grandmother was considered quite radical in her time, insisted on working in the family business when women were expected to focus solely on social obligations. She built the foundation that eventually became Anderson Holdings. I hadn't known this history. The parallels to my own situation with the Anderson family were striking. She sounds remarkable, I said sincerely. She was. Harold adjusted his perfectly aligned cufflinks. The point is, Lisa, I recognize ambition and capability when I see it. I may not have fully appreciated the significance of your company initially, but I never underestimated your intelligence or determination. Coming from Harold, this was a substantial acknowledgement. Thank you for that, I said, genuinely touched by this glimpse of respect. However, Harold continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. My concern about James remains. The advocacy position, while admirable, offers limited growth potential and significantly reduced compensation. The firm partnership represents years of investment and positioning. The partnership represents the path you chose for Jim, I corrected gently. Not necessarily the one he would have chosen for himself. Harold frowned slightly. Parents guide their children based on experience and wisdom. The Anderson legacy at the firm spans generations, and perhaps that legacy will continue through different channels, I suggested. Jim's work in healthcare advocacy connects to both the legal profession and the Anderson tradition of community leadership. It's not abandoning the legacy, just expressing it differently. Harold seemed to consider this perspective, his strategic mind visibly processing this alternative framing of his son's choices. The Foundation Gala, he said after a moment, changing direction. Carol tells me you've agreed to deliver the keynote. I have, I confirmed, curious about this shift in topic. And that Parker will be attending. Yes, Bill has accepted the invitation. Harold nodded, seemingly satisfied with this confirmation. The Foundation Board is considering a major initiative in healthcare access. Your perspective as keynote speaker could be particularly valuable in shaping that direction. Now I understood the purpose of Harold's visit. While genuinely concerned about Jim's career change, he was also, in typical Anderson fashion, looking for strategic advantages and connections. My position at Parker Innovations and my relationship with Bill represented potential value to the Foundation's initiatives. I'd be happy to discuss healthcare access innovations with the Foundation Board, I said carefully. It's an area where technology can make a tremendous difference for underserved populations. Excellent. Harold stood, our conversation apparently having achieved his primary objective. And Lisa, regarding James? I may not fully understand his current choices, but I do want him to find fulfillment in his work. As his father, that's my ultimate concern. The sentiment seemed genuine, despite Harold's continued skepticism about Jim's decision. I believe he will, I assured him. The passion I've seen from him these past 2 weeks is something worth nurturing. Harold extended his hand, a gesture of professional respect rather than family formality. We've underestimated you, Lisa. I see that now. Whatever happens with James's career, I hope we can establish a more productive relationship. Moving forward. I'd like that, I said sincerely, shaking his hand. After Harold left, Michelle appeared in my doorway, curiosity evident in her expression. Productive visit? Surprisingly so, I admitted. Harold Anderson is nothing if not adaptable when he identifies potential value. He's realized that fighting my influence with Jim is counterproductive, so he's shifting to find ways to align the Anderson interests with our new circumstances. Strategic, Michelle observed. Exactly. I smiled slightly. In his own way, Harold is acknowledging reality and adjusting course. That's more than I expected 2 weeks ago. The rest of the day passed in a blur of integration meetings and technical reviews. As I prepared to leave that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Jim. Dad came by the office today, surprisingly civil about my hospital plans. Even suggested Foundation might support expanded advocacy program. Your influence? I smiled at the message. Harold had indeed pivoted quickly, finding a way to maintain connection with his son's new career direction while preserving Anderson involvement through the foundation. Perhaps, I texted back, or perhaps he's finally seeing you clearly too. As I drove home, I reflected on the remarkable transformations of the past 2 weeks, not just in my professional status, but in the fundamental dynamics of my relationship with Jim and the Anderson family. The acquisition announcement had functioned as a catalyst, revealing truths and possibilities that had been obscured by years of assumptions and expectations. There would be more adjustments ahead, more moments of tension as we all navigated this new terrain. The Foundation Gala would be a particularly visible test of these evolving relationships, with the entire Anderson social circle watching how we presented ourselves in this changed reality. But for now, I felt a deep satisfaction, not just in what I had built professionally, but in what Jim and I were beginning to build together, a partnership of equals, each pursuing meaningful work, supporting each other's growth rather than conforming to prescribed roles. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Jim's car already there, earlier than usual. Through the kitchen window, I could see him moving about, apparently preparing dinner, another small but significant change in our household patterns. Small steps, adding up to a potentially transformative journey, not just for me, but for all of us. The night of the Anderson Family Foundation Gala arrived with perfect early autumn weather, crisp, clear, and full of possibility. The grand ballroom of the Denver Art Museum glowed with elegant lighting, fresh floral arrangements, and the quiet hum of Denver's social elite gathering for what Carol had been promoting as a transformative evening for the Foundation's future. I stood in the small preparation room adjacent to the main hall, reviewing my keynote notes one final time. The emerald and diamond Art Deco brooch caught the light as I smoothed my midnight blue gown, not the pale pink Carol had originally suggested for the occasion, but a choice that reflected my own style and professional standing. A light knock at the door preceded Michelle's entrance. She had accepted my invitation to attend as both colleague and friend. "Full house out there," she reported, excitement evident in her voice. "The governor just arrived, and Bill Parker is charming everyone. I think he's made 3 hospital CEOs swoon already." I smiled, grateful for Bill's supportive presence. "And the Andersons?" Carol is in her element, introducing Bill to everyone as our daughter-in-law's strategic partner. Harold is working the room with his usual tactical precision. Michelle paused, then added with genuine warmth, "And Jim looks incredibly proud. He keeps telling people to make sure they don't miss the most insightful perspective on healthcare innovation they'll ever hear." The image of Jim actively promoting my expertise to the Anderson social circle, people who had only ever seen me as his accessory, filled me with a complex emotion that was part vindication, part tenderness for his evolution. 5 minutes. The event coordinator announced from the doorway. "Mrs. Anderson asks if you need anything before we begin." "I'm ready," I assured her, taking a deep breath. Michelle squeezed my arm encouragingly. "Go change some minds." The ballroom fell silent as I took the stage, the spotlight creating a moment of isolation before I could make out the assembled faces. In the front row sat Jim, flanked by his parents. Carol was resplendent in designer formal wear, her expression a carefully maintained blend of social graciousness and familial pride. Harold watched with analytical interest, likely assessing how my performance would reflect on the Foundation's reputation. And Jim's face shone with genuine admiration and support. Beyond them, I spotted Bill Parker seated with several hospital administrators, the governor and his wife at a prominent table, and scattered throughout the room, the familiar faces of Denver's social elite, people who had been evaluating and categorizing me as James Anderson's wife for 5 years.
Hi.
Good evening, I began, my voice steady and clear. Tonight, I want to talk about seeing the unseen. For the next 20 minutes, I spoke about healthcare innovation not as abstract technology, but as a deeply human endeavor, bridging gaps for vulnerable patients, empowering medical professionals with better tools, and creating connections across previously siloed systems. I shared stories from hospitals that had implemented MediSync's protocols, including the emergency room doctor who had told me, "Your software gave us back the 3 minutes that saved a child's life." Throughout my address, I wove in the theme of perspective, how limited vision prevents innovation, how assumptions create blind spots, how seeing people clearly, with their full potential, can transform not just healthcare, but any human system. The challenge for all of us, I concluded, is to recognize that innovation isn't just about technology, it's about perception, having the courage to see beyond established patterns, to value contributions from unexpected sources, to reimagine what's possible when we set aside preconceptions about who belongs where and what matters most. As I finished speaking, there was a moment of silence before the applause began, tentative at first, then building to an enthusiastic response. Carol was the first to rise for a standing ovation, her face showing genuine emotion rather than social performance. Harold followed, then Jim, and soon the entire room was on its feet. Carol reached the stage before I could descend, taking both my hands in hers. "Lisa," she said, her voice carrying to the nearby tables despite her attempt at privacy. "That was extraordinary, truly visionary." For perhaps the first time in our relationship, her approval felt authentic rather than conditional, an acknowledgement of my actual contribution rather than my conformity to Anderson expectations. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of congratulations and conversations. Hospital administrators wanted to discuss implementation details, foundation board members were eager to explore potential initiatives, and Bill Parker moved through the crowd strategically connecting people and possibilities with his characteristic energetic vision. "The governor wants to establish a statewide healthcare information task force," Bill informed me between introductions. "He's hoping you might consider leading it, combining public service with your Parker Innovations role." "That's an intriguing possibility," I acknowledged, mentally adding it to the growing list of opportunities emerging from my new visibility. Across the room, I spotted Jim deep in conversation with the hospital program director and Harold, the three of them engaged in what appeared to be a substantive discussion rather than social pleasantries. The sight of father and son finding new common ground, centered around meaningful work rather than Anderson tradition, filled me with quiet hope. "Lisa, dear." Carol appeared at my elbow, impeccably maintaining her hostess duties despite the excitement of the evening. "There's someone I'd particularly like you to meet." She guided me toward an elegant older woman I recognized as Margaret Whitfield, one of the most influential philanthropists in Colorado healthcare. I had attempted to secure meetings with her during MediSync's early days, but her foundation had never responded to my requests. "Margaret, may I present my daughter-in-law Lisa Thompson?" Carol introduced us with a subtle but significant emphasis on my name rather than my relation to the Anderson family. "Ms. Thompson?" Margaret extended her hand with new respect. "Your address was most illuminating. I understand you've been developing these healthcare innovations for some time." 5 years, I confirmed, though gaining traction with established institutions was initially challenging. Margaret nodded knowingly. Innovation often faces resistance, particularly when it comes from unexpected directions. "Perhaps we should revisit your proposals," for rural healthcare implementation. My foundation has new priorities in that area. As Carol gracefully excused herself to attend to other guests, I caught the slight smile of satisfaction on her face. She had just facilitated a connection she had previously blocked, a small but meaningful act of reconciliation. The evening continued its elegant progression through dinner and the Foundation's fundraising program. I found myself seated between Bill Parker and the governor, engaged in a stimulating conversation about public-private partnerships in healthcare access. "Your perspective bridges worlds we typically see as separate," the governor observed. "Technical innovation, patient advocacy, medical systems. You've developed a holistic vision that's quite compelling." "She's been saying the same things for years," Jim commented from across the table, pride evident in his voice. "The difference is, now people are finally listening." His simple acknowledgement of my consistent vision, despite years of being underestimated, touched me deeply. As dessert was being served, Carol approached our table, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Lisa, the Foundation Board has made a decision we'd like to announce this evening with your permission." I raised an eyebrow, curious about this unexpected development. "Of course, Carol." She signaled to Harold, who joined us with an expression of rare, genuine enthusiasm. "The board vote was unanimous," he informed me, exchanging a significant look with Carol. A moment later, Carol stood at the podium, commanding the room's attention with her practiced social authority. "Distinguished guests, the Anderson Family Foundation has been supporting healthcare initiatives for 3 generations. Tonight, inspired by our keynote speaker's compelling vision, the board has voted to establish the Lisa Thompson Innovation Fund with an initial endowment of $5 million. A murmur of surprise rippled through the ballroom. Carol continued, her voice strong and clear. "This fund will support technology access initiatives for underserved patient populations, bridging the gap between cutting-edge innovation and those most in need of its benefits." I sat in stunned silence as the announcement continued. Carol was not only publicly acknowledging my expertise, but institutionalizing it within the Anderson legacy, creating a permanent connection between my work and the family foundation. "We've asked Lisa to chair the fund's advisory board," Carol concluded, bringing her unique perspective to guide this important work. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Jim reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "Did you know about this?" I whispered. He shook his head, looking as surprised as I felt. "Mom's been meeting with the board privately all week. She said it was foundation business." Bill Parker leaned close, his expression both impressed and amused. "Family dynamics continue to evolve in fascinating ways," he observed quietly. "This is quite a statement from your mother-in-law." Indeed it was. 5 years of being the outsider, the trophy wife expected to support from the background, and now Carol was publicly cementing my role as a leader in my own right, not despite the Anderson connection, but within it, on my own terms. As the evening began to wind down, I found a quiet moment alone with Carol near the museum's spectacular west window, the Denver skyline creating a glittering backdrop for our conversation. "The Innovation Fund," I began, still processing the magnitude of the gesture. "That's an extraordinarily generous initiative, Carol." "It's the right direction for the foundation," she replied, maintaining her characteristic poise even as her expression softened. "And the right recognition of your contribution." "Thank you," I said simply. "Not just for the fund, but for seeing me. Really seeing me." Carol's carefully maintained composure wavered slightly. "I should have seen you sooner, Lisa. We all should have." "What changed your perspective?" I asked, genuinely curious about her evolution. Carol considered the question thoughtfully. "Watching you at that press conference with Bill Parker, you were so certain, so completely in your element. It made me realize how much we'd missed by trying to fit you into our predetermined idea of an Anderson wife. She smiled ruefully. And then, of course, there was your effect on Jim. My effect? He's alive again, Carol said simply. Engaged, purposeful, talking about making a difference instead of making partner. I haven't seen him this way since law school, before the Anderson expectations took over. Her insight surprised me with its clarity and self-awareness. The advocacy program is perfect for him, I agreed. Yes, Carol nodded. Harold is still adjusting to the idea, but he'll come around completely once he sees the foundation connection. He's already talking about establishing a legal advisory component that would keep Jim connected to the firm in a consulting capacity. Typical Harold, finding the strategic compromise that preserved connections while accommodating change. Anderson adaptability, I observed with a small smile. Indeed. Carol straightened her already perfect posture. We've survived for 5 generations by knowing when to bend rather than break. As the gala concluded, Jim and I said our goodbyes to the remaining guests. Bill Parker departed with promises of continued conversations about the Innovation Fund's potential connection to Parker's philanthropy initiatives. Harold and Carol left last, ensuring every detail was properly managed. You were magnificent, Jim told me as we drove home, his voice filled with genuine admiration. I've never seen Mom's friends so impressed. Margaret Whitfield asked if you might consider joining her foundation board. It was a remarkable evening, I agreed, still processing the various implications of the Innovation Fund announcement. Your mother surprised me. She surprises all of us sometimes, Jim replied with newfound insight. Beneath all that, Anderson, tradition, and protocol, she's actually quite strategic about adapting to changing circumstances. He reached for my hand as we drove through the quiet Denver streets. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? For not giving up on me. On us. When you could have just taken your $87 million and walked away from the whole Anderson circus. The thought had never seriously occurred to me, despite the tensions of the past 5 years. I married you, Jim. Not your family name, not your social position. You. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this simple truth. I'm finally becoming someone worthy of that choice, he said softly. When we arrived home, a package waited on our doorstep, a delivery requiring a signature. Inside was a vintage leather portfolio with a note in Carol's elegant handwriting. Lisa, found while reorganizing the foundation archives. Harold's grandmother used this to present her first initiative to the family board in 1943. Seemed fitting it should continue its journey with you. The Innovation Fund is yours to shape. Carol. The portfolio contained original documents from the Anderson Foundation's earliest healthcare initiatives, including handwritten notes about bringing medical services to underserved communities in post-war Colorado. She's passing the torch, Jim observed, understanding the significance of the gesture. Not just acknowledging your place, but actively connecting your work to the Anderson legacy. I ran my fingers over the worn leather, feeling the weight of its history and meaning. Your mother fainted when I announced the sale of my company, I mused, and now she's created a permanent fund in my name. The buyer's identity changed everything, Jim noted with a small smile. But not in the way any of us expected. Parker Innovations wasn't just acquiring MediSync, they were validating everything you've been saying for years. And that validation forced all of us, especially my parents, to see you clearly for the first time. As we prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the remarkable journey of the past month. What had begun with a dramatic announcement and a mother-in-law's fainting spell had evolved into something I never could have anticipated. Not just professional recognition, but a fundamental transformation in how the Andersons perceived me, how Jim understood himself, and how we related to each other as partners. The Innovation Fund would create opportunities for meaningful impact beyond anything I could have achieved alone. Jim's advocacy work would bring him fulfillment no partnership track could provide. And our marriage, tested and transformed by these revelations, had the potential to become something far stronger than the initially unequal union we'd started with. "What are you thinking about?" Jim asked as we settled into bed. "Perception," I replied. "How differently we all see each other now compared to a month ago." "I like the view much better these days," he said, drawing me close. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about Carol's journey from dismissive mother-in-law to enthusiastic champion, from fainting at my success to institutionalizing my vision within her precious family foundation. It wasn't just acceptance. It was active integration of my contribution into the Anderson legacy, but on my terms, respecting my identity rather than subsuming it. The most dramatic fainting spell in Anderson family history had indeed marked the beginning of a transformation none of us could have predicted, and this was just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.